Chapter Spooks.
G'day, and welcome to Chapter Spooks, where we talk about the books that keep your kids up at night. I'm your podcast host, Matthew A.J. Anderson, a horror author, narratologist, word nerd, and sedentary gentleman. And today, we are looking at the next, and in fact last book in the Frightville series called Night of the Mask. Now, this book has two main claims to fame, but I'll start with the first because it's something that I both praise, but also I find a little disappointing. And that is that the main character of this book has a disability. They are wheelchair bound. We never exactly learn why he's in a wheelchair, but also we don't have to, that's not important to the story. But it's one of the few times I've ever seen a protagonist in one of these books who is not completely able-bodied. And that's interesting, especially because in this book they do use it for some of the horrors, some of the scares in the story, without going down that road of saying that the disability itself is horrifying, merely the way that you're treated, the things that you have to go through. But as I said, it's disappointing because I own so many Chapter Spooks books, and this is the only one I've seen thus far that has a person with a disability, any of that kind of diversity. And there is such a broad diversity in this disability spectrum. I mean, I don't even think I've seen a character that's colorblind, let alone has something on the autism spectrum, something to do with a movement disability. I've never seen anyone who's blind, deaf, or any of these things, and it just seems like a lost opportunity. I mean, for two reasons. So the first reason, obviously, is that there's so much you can explore with stuff like that. Unfortunately, a lot of movies, when they deal with this stuff, they go the drama route and they think they need to make the person hate their disability. When honestly, from the people I've spoken to with disabilities, unless it's later quiet in life, most people just see it as a part of their life. And also, they don't see their disability as their problem. They see the way society treats them as the problem. But secondly, and most importantly to me as a writer, I genuinely believe that everyone can be a hero. And so, when you write stories where every single main character is the same young, white, able-bodied man, cisgender, probably from America, it makes it feel like there's only one person who can be a hero, and nobody else who looks any different, who acts any different. They don't feel like a hero when you do that. And so I genuinely believe there needs to be more diversity in fiction. And so, whilst I love seeing it in this book, and I think it was done pretty well, I wish there was so much more. But the second thing I want to bring up is that this book is, I think, the first time we're dealing with the little critters kind of monsters. So the first thing that comes to mind is the movie Gremlins, because that was the first one I saw like this and my favorite. I think for Chapter Spooks, the only ones I can think of is maybe Revenge of the Lawn Gnomes, although they aren't all that small. I mean, they're a lot smaller in the film that was based on it. Oh, and I guess Night of the Living Clay, although Night of the Living Clay wasn't very good. Or also, I think Monster Blood 4 has a weird thing. So I haven't seen too much of it, only 2 in Goosebumps, and I haven't seen too many small critters, but it's an interesting story to do because small critters, by nature of being small, aren't all that scary. So you need a few things to make them scary. You could either have tons of them, so that it's like an army swarming you of little critters, like vermin or rats, or you could give them unusual abilities or uncanny looks or weapons or even magic, such as in this book they do have invisibility, so that makes them a little bit more scary. And whilst I think there's a lot that can be done with these little critters, I'm not going to lie, in this book I do think it leans more towards the silly side, and I'm not really sure how to change that without changing the entire story, so I don't even know what I'd suggest to fix it, except, don't write it like this. But yeah, that seems a little bit critical. Honestly, I think the best way to explain myself would be to actually just get into the story. So let's look at the last book in the Frightville series, Frightville number 4, Night of the Mask. So, Chapter 1, we're introduced to our main character, Tucker, who has just received an invitation to Sasha's birthday party, but before he can even read the thing, she's so excited she can't help but blurt out everything that's on it, that it's going to be a dress-up party, and that, she would like presents. I mean, she doesn't expect presents, but she'd like them, and also it's going to be held at her house, at Stormwatch House, and Tucker is thinking all about this because Stormwatch House is like this enormous manor that stands over their town, and ancient building that everyone thinks is gorgeous. In fact, his mum really wants to see inside it. As we'll learn later, his mum is a horror author, and so she has all these stories and ideas that she'd like to write about this house. And so our kid, of course, accepts this invitation. Not only does he want to spend time with his friend Sasha, but he also wants to check out Stormwatch House because it's such a cool old building. Also, a quick side note here about Sasha. We later learn that her mum's name is Dr. Okafor, and she's a doctor. That's why she can afford this building. But I looked up the name Okafor. I'd never heard of it before. But apparently it's an Igbo name, which is like South African. And so Sasha's family is likely a black second-generation African family. And as I said at the start, I like diversity, but I'm a little disappointed that this book didn't mention it. I had to look up the name in order to figure out that this family was non-white. And the sad fact is most people tend to assume that everyone is in the racial majority, so if you want to include racial diversity in your books, you kind of have to mention when your characters are non-white. Or persons of color, if you prefer that term. That afternoon, when Tucker's mum picks him up, he rides his wheelchair into the van and he tells her that he's going to go see this party at Stormwatch House, and his mum really wants him to like take notes and stuff because she'd love to know more about it. And I love it, Tucker saying, well, hey, it's party's for me, it's not for you, you know. And it's a good scene with one little exception. All right, so yes, if you have a wheelchair, you'll need to get a ramp in there, but basically the ramp then folds up and then they drive off. That is not how you should ever drive with someone with a wheelchair. You need to lock them in. They still need seatbelts and stuff, but because they brought their own seat, you need to usually latch their chair down, anchor it to the floor, and then give them a seatbelt. So this does happen a few times in this book where it seems to skim over some of the little details, and you don't have to dwell on it as much as I personally would like to, but even if you just said, he drove up the ramp and she latched him in, right? 4 words. That's all you need for me to not think that you're driving and potentially going to throw your kid back on his chair next time you accelerate. But most importantly, he mentions that this is a costume party, and so his mum thinks it's a great excuse to go check out the store Frightville. Like I said, she's a horror author, so of course she's keen on this stuff. And whilst our kid really would rather go to Party World, because he's a little bit skittish. In fact, a lot of kids pick on him for the fact that he refuses to read his mum's horror stories because he finds them too scary. So he's not really keen on a store called Frightville, but his mum is blazing forward and she really wants to check out this store. So he says, fine, I'll tag along with, and in his mind he thinks, and when we fail to find a costume, we'll go to Party World. A few minutes later, they pulled up to Frightville. Tucker wheeled himself down the van's ramp, then through the door of the store. As his mother went off to browse on her own, Tucker took a look around. His mother had kind of been right about it being an antique store. Not the sort of antiques you usually found for sale. Instead of old tables and lamps, the store was filled with things like real stuffed crows with glinting glass eyes, and cases crammed with books that had titles like Toadstool Soup and other deadly dishes. There was even a cabinet cluttered with dusty glass bottles and a sign that read, "May contain genies, open at your own risk." "Good afternoon," a voice said, making Tucker jump. A man was standing beside him. He was tall and thin, and he was dressed in a black suit. His grey hair was slicked back, and he regarded Tucker with eyes the same colour as his hair. "My apologies for startling you," he said. "My name is Odson Ends. This is my store." "Oh," Tucker said. "It's, really great." He looked around, hoping his mother had finished browsing and they could go, but she was nowhere to be seen. "Is there anything I can help you find?" Mr. Ends inquired. "I don't think so," Tucker said. "I mean, I need a mask for this party I'm going to, but I doubt you have anything like that." Mr. Ends smiled. It was like a crack appearing on frozen ice. "Come with me," he said. Tucker followed along behind as Mr. Ends went down an aisle. They stopped in front of a wall on which dozens of masks dangled from wooden pegs. They weren't the usual plastic or rubber masks like the ones sold at Party World. These looked handmade. "They're papier-mâché," Mr. Ends explained, pronouncing the last part with an accent. Tucker knew that papier-mâché was just a fancy word meaning paper mixed with water and glue. He'd made some himself the summer before in art class at Camp Weed Patch, but he'd never seen anything like the masks on the wall. They were weird and wonderful. A few were scary, like the witch face with a long, crooked nose, and the thing that looked like a sea monster. Others were more fanciful, like a big-eared rabbit and an elf. "The magical thing about masks is that they let you turn yourself into what you want the world to see you as," Mr. Ends said. "Do you see anything here you would like to be?" Tucker thought it was a strange way of asking if he liked any of them. He looked at all the faces staring back at him. Who do I want to be? He wondered. Or what? He liked a lot of the masks, but which one felt the most like who he was? He considered a cat face, which was kind of like the lion from The Wizard of Oz, but it wasn't quite right. Neither were the clown or the fish head or the face made out of green leaves and flowers. He was about to say that none of them were what he was looking for. Then his eyes stopped on a mask. It was shaped like a bat, and the eye holes were in the middle of its wings. It wasn't as unusual or fanciful as the others, but Tucker liked it. That one, he said, pointing. An interesting choice, Mr. N said as he took the mask from its peg and handed it to Tucker. What's interesting about it? Tucker asked. I'm sure you've heard the expression blind as a bat, Mr. N said. It's not true, of course. Bats actually see quite well, but they also use echolocation, sound waves, to navigate in the dark and find food. It's an extraordinary ability, being able to see things that would otherwise be invisible. Tucker placed the mask over his face and looked through the eye holes. Do things look any different? Mr. Enns asked. I don't think so, Tucker said. Mr. Enns replied. Well, sometimes a mask is just a mask. Sure, Tucker agreed, although he really had no idea what the man was talking about. So, we've got ourselves our titular mask, and also I'm sad to say that this is the last time we'll be hearing from Odds and Ends, which is a shame. I love this character, but that's the last he'll appear in this entire series, so wave him farewell and shed a tear as we move on. So we skip ahead to the next scene. Our kid goes to the party, we meet Dr. Okafor, we head inside, and we see all the people who have all their masks on and stuff, but first things first, before entering the main party room, Tucker and Sasha head to the main entrance where she shows him this grand portrait of one of the people who built the house. For the house was built and designed by a man named Ahab Thatcher, but unfortunately the house burnt down a long time ago. But then one of his descendants, Felix Thatcher, who is the man in this portrait, rebuilt it to exacting measurements, and he claimed to have done so with the help of little creatures called grelkins, and in fact, in the picture, he is holding in his hand what looks like a little wooden doll of like a garden gnome. There's some talk about them being tricky little guys, and most importantly, our girl says that they also turn invisible, and the only way to see them is with a special pair of glasses that Felix Thatcher invented. And look, quick little pause here. I have to say, look, I get that you're explaining this to the audience so they understand, but as soon as I read this, I thought, okay, well, that's the entire story, isn't it? The mask that the kid got obviously can see these things. The things are going to stir up trouble because they look like little troublemakers, and they're called grelkins, for goodness sake. Clearly they're referencing gremlins. And I don't mean the movie, I mean the original mythological creature, which was what people called it when machines in the army started to fall apart. They just said, oh, gremlins got into it. So obviously the little mischief makers, obviously, like the whole plot was piecing together in front of my eyes, and I was a little disappointed because it meant that there wasn't going to be any more surprises in this book. But that's not entirely fair, because after this scene, we head into the next room, and Tucker is assuming that this little story is just there to freak him out, because, like I said, he doesn't like his mum's horror stories. Everyone in school knows, they tease him for it, and so he's thinking maybe she's just saying this to freak me out, although he does later learn that she tells this story to everyone who enters the house, because, it's some of the history of Stormwatch House. Then in the next room, they play some games like Pin the Tail on the Donkey, and they play around with that, and it's really well written scenes and all, but it's not really important to the plot that I'm summarizing here, because next thing they go and they start opening presents. So they go to the table and she starts opening up all the presents, and there's a fun bit how, like, every time she opens it, she says, oh, it's just what I wanted, to the point that after the fourth present, everyone starts chanting it along with her every time she opens a present. It's kind of a cute scene. But then our kid, he gets singled out because she opens the presents and says, oh, where's the one from you? And Tucker knows that he got her a set of darts and a dartboard, but he can't see it anywhere, and he says, oh, I can't see it, it must have dropped or something. She says, no, we put them all here. It's okay, you didn't have to get me anything. And then Tucker gets a little upset because he's like, no, I got you something though. Like, you know what I mean? Like, anyone would feel upset that they were being accused of lying. Thankfully, we move on and we eat cake, so they have the cake scene. And then afterwards, Sasha invites all of her guests to come down to Felix's workshop, because Felix not only rebuilt all of this, but his actual job was a toy maker. So she takes all the kids to a secret hidden panel, which she clicks to open, and it leads to some basement stairs. And Tucker looks down these warily, but thankfully, Sasha has a solution for him. "The workshop is down there," she said. As the others started to go down, she turned to Tucker, who was looking at the steep stairs and wondering how he would get down them. "Don't worry," Sasha said. "There's an elevator that you can use, only it's kind of small." "How small?" Tucker asked. "It will probably only fit you, so you'll have to go alone," said Sasha. "I'll meet you at the bottom, okay?" Tucker hesitated. The thought of being alone in a small space wasn't very appealing, and what if the elevator got stuck? He felt the uneasy feeling coming back. He pushed it down. He wanted to see the workshop. He nodded. Sasha opened a second door beside the first one. This one was smaller than the other, and behind it was a space just big enough for Tucker to roll his chair into. He turned the chair around and rolled back. Sure enough, he was able to get the chair inside with only enough room left for the door to close again. "The buttons are over there," Sasha said, pointing. "I'll see you in a minute, and don't worry about the flickering lights. It's a short ride." Before Tucker could ask her what she meant about the lights, she shut the door. Then he understood. It was dim inside the tiny elevator, and the lights pulsated a little. He almost called out for Sasha to let him out. Instead, he pushed hard on the button. He heard the machine whir to life, and a moment later it started to descend. Then it stopped. The lights flickered again, before sputtering completely out. At first he thought he was at the bottom already and waited for Sasha to open the door. When nothing happened, he called out, "Sasha? Are you there?" The only answer was what sounded like laughter. Then Tucker heard something moving around in the elevator. Something small. It made scratching sounds as it scuttled around somewhere underneath his chair. "Hello?" Tucker said. There was no answer. "Sasha!" he shouted. "Somebody!" Then he was sure he heard an old rusty voice whisper,
"Can you see me now?"
He jerked the lever up and down, frantically trying to get the elevator to move. The elevator dropped. Tucker breathed in and out rapidly, trying not to panic, and not doing a very good job of it. Then the door in front of him finally slid open, and Sasha and his other friends were standing there. "Get it away from me!" Tucker yelped, moving his chair out into the light so quickly that everyone scattered to get out of his way. "Get what away from you?" Sasha asked. "There's nothing there, Tuck, see?" Tucker looked down. The elevator was empty. The others stared at him just as they had when they heard that his present was missing. "I think there's a rat in there," he muttered, looking at the shadowy interior of the elevator and hoping a whiskered rodent would scurry out and make him feel better. None did. Yes, I love this scene so much. It's what I was saying before, that when you have characters who have a diverse abilities, like this one, like there's a kid in a wheelchair, means he can't go down the stairs, and so he alone goes in the elevator. You couldn't do this if everyone else was also using the elevator, because elevators are designed for multiple people, unless, like in this book, they're designed for someone in a wheelchair. And so that means that he had to go down alone, isolated, so that we could have this scene. And also the Grelkins, they're working like gremlins, so they can affect the machinery in there, and they can tease him in this small confined space. Like, do you see what I mean when I say that this stuff can actually make things better for your story, can make a better horror story? I haven't thought too much about other stories, but at the very least I know that it can improve stories like the ones I write. And if you can't see how this story is better because the main character is in a wheelchair, I don't think we're reading the same books. And as they're in the basement, basically Sasha shows them around, and they're surprised to see that there's all kinds of tools around, and she explains that they deliberately left it messy like this because they feel like it adds to the atmosphere when people come down. And she tells a little bit about the Grelkins, how the reason why there's all these stories about them in the house is because it's said that Felix Thatcher, as a toy maker, used to use them to help him build his toys. Although because they look like little wooden dolls, most people assume that the Grelkins were just more toys he made. But the story is that they came in over on the boats, the same boats that the Thatcher family came in on. In fact, I believe Ahab Thatcher was a ship captain, and that's why this whole house is called Stormwatch House, because they deliberately built it tall enough that if you go up to the top tower, you can actually see the ocean from there, so he could actually keep an eye on the ships at sea. And as they're talking, they see that something suddenly shoots and gets stuck in Sasha's hair. And she's wondering what it is, but Tucker knows immediately. He says, "That's a Velcro dart," because that's the exact present he got. And so he looks around and he sees that there's a dartboard on the ground and all the wrapping paper ripped off from the present that he got her. And they hear giggling and they turn to see who threw the dart, and everyone sees a small little wooden figure dancing on top of the table, sort of giggling and making fun of them. And at first Tucker freaks out and says, "Oh, the Grelkins, they're real, we got to get out of here," and he spins around his chair. But Sasha dismisses him and says, no, it's not real, Eek, get out of there. And she calls out her younger brother, who is giggling to himself, playing with a little figurine of a Grelkin. Apparently her little brother was supposed to be upstairs watching a film while she and her friends had a party, but he decided to come down and torment everybody. To save face, Tucker says, "Oh, yeah, I was just playing along," but very few people believe that, unfortunately. So after the kids finish looking around, they head back upstairs, and thankfully nothing weird happens in the elevator this time. But when they're upstairs and eating a bit more cake, Eek actually comes to Tucker to apologize, saying, "Look, I'm sorry I scared you so much. It was just a joke, but you should have seen your face. It was really good." And Sasha sees him and she scolds him and says, "You shouldn't have stolen my present." And Eek says, "I didn't though. I went downstairs because you guys were all downstairs, and I saw the present was down there, already ripped open. So that's why I threw the dart at your hair." So there's a little bit more until the party is over, through a bit of a time skip, and as Tucker is leaving, Sasha runs up and says, "Oh, you nearly forgot this," and she hands him his bat mask, which he apparently dropped when he was in the workshop. So he takes it back and thanks her, and he puts it on his face and turns back to wave, and as he does, he sees that the door to their house opens just a crack, and he can swear that he can see a little something come out and quickly run out towards him into the darkness. And he tries to convince himself that it's just a cat. But of course, you and I know better that a Grelkin has escaped from Stormwatch House. In the next scene, we get introduced to Great Aunt Hilda, who is staying with Tucker's family. And this isn't out of nowhere. It wasn't mentioned in an earlier scene. I didn't mention it because it wasn't that interesting. But what is interesting is when he talks to his Great Aunt Hilda, Tucker mentions the Grelkins, and he describes them a little bit when she asks what on earth a Grelkin is, and she says, "Oh, that's interesting, it sounds a bit like a Tomtar." See, because Great Aunt Hilda is Swedish, and so she's talking a bit about Swedish mythology. So, fun little side note now, so obviously, Grelkins aren't real. I looked them up online, and the only mentions I found were apparently World of Warcraft has some creatures called Grelkins, but they're not tiny, in fact, they're very, very big. But Tomtar, they are likely referencing like the Tomte or the Nis, which were these little, they're kind of like brownies, but not exactly because they're Swedish. They're meant to be little house helpers that can be a little mischievous. They're not supposed to be invisible, but I can sort of hand wave that because a lot of people like to make mythological creatures invisible as a way of saying that's why we can't find them, you know, like, so that's a very common thing for all mythical creatures. And also there is some talk of them being shapeshifters, which you could explain as them turning invisible and moving things. But even so, I like that this does have some real mythology in there, because I was kind of annoyed that they just made up a creature called a Grelkin. Like, there is so much mythology out there, you don't really need to make stuff up, unless you're worried about objectifying someone else's culture, but otherwise, you could probably use that stuff. And this is taking some liberties anyway, because it really, rather than the little house helper, it seems to be leaning a lot more towards the idea of them being like garden gnomes. In fact, they all have little red hats. But the most important thing we learn is that they're scared of cats. Although, that seems kind of obvious to me, because, I mean, if you're the size of a mouse, of course you're going to be scared of a cat. But anyway, after this conversation, we basically get a little skip through of how they do some more things that afternoon. They make some vaniljakor, which are apparently like Swedish jam drop cookies. And after the rest of the day, they then head off to bed. And that night, Tucker is having a dream that he's lost in Stormwatch House when he hears a voice call out to him.
Can you see me now?
He asked. Tucker woke up. Frantically, he felt around his bed for his cat. "Gustafa," he whispered. "Gustafa, where are you?" Something moved on the floor.
Can you see me now?
The voice from his dream said. Only he wasn't dreaming now. He was awake. Tucker reached for the light on his bedside table. In his panic, he knocked it with his hand. The lamp fell to the floor, and he heard the bulb shatter. Now the only light in his room came from the window, but the moon was just a tiny sliver in the sky, and it filled his room with shadows. "Gustafa!" Tucker hissed, still moving his hand around the bedside table, as if there might be something there that would help him. His fingers touched something. It was the bat mask. Instinctively, he picked it up and pressed it against his face.
Can you see me now?
The voice sounded closer. Tucker looked around, and now he could see something. On the rug below, barely visible in the thin moonlight, was a small figure wearing a pointed hat. Tucker gasped. The figure moved toward him, one step at a time. It reached out a tiny hand. Tucker felt his heart beat faster. He pulled the mask away from his face. The figure disappeared. Tucker put the mask back on again, and once more he could see the shadowy form moving steadily across the floor. It got close enough that he could see its face. The tiny dark eyes stared at him without blinking. "You can see me now," the voice creaked. Tucker thought the withered mouth turned up in a faint smile. He tried to drop the mask so that he wouldn't have to look at the horrible thing, but he was frozen with fear. Gustafa leapt into the room. He arched his back and hissed. One paw swept out, hitting the Grelkin, which staggered backward, but didn't fall over. Gustafer swiped at it again, missing. The Grelkin ran quickly to the doorway. Tucker heard the sound of footsteps as it retreated down the hall. Gustafer came over to him and sat down, staring at the empty doorway. Tucker half hoped the cat would chase after the Grelkin, but he also didn't want to be left alone in the dark. He stroked Gustafer's head. "Good boy," he said, finally finding his voice. Okay, so I got two little issues I want to bring up here. First of all, we never get a great description of the Grelkins, because they're described as having like withered faces and mouths, but they're also described as being made of wood. And with the little red hats, I was sort of imagining garden gnomes, but garden gnomes tend to be made of stone and look like they're painted pink with regular bodies and stuff. So I wasn't entirely sure what these things looked like, and especially since that seems to be part of the fear factor in this story, the fact that we don't actually get that is really diminishing to the ability of this story to be scary, because without a proper description, my mind just kept going back to garden gnomes. And whilst I think they are conceptually creepy for reasons that I'm not going to get into right now, I still think that they're not scary looking. But then in the next scene, we talk about how our kid has got his bat mask and he's kept it in the hanging bag on his wheelchair so that he can have access to it throughout the day, and he keeps checking to see if there's any Grelkins around. But in a later scene, in fact in this very scene after the parents and his aunt leave the house because they're going to go pick up some dinner and he wants to investigate the house a bit more, he gets attacked by a Grelkin, and it says that he wheeled himself manually to get away from it out of his panic. So, I mean, that is a thing that exists. You can have a manual and mechanically driven wheelchair. That's a thing that exists. But what you can't have is a hanging bag on a manual wheelchair, because they tend to hang on the outside and it would get in the way of the wheel. I mean, I guess you could hang it on the inside, depending on the design of the chair, but I mean, that would get in the way of your legs, so unless your legs were numb, it would be uncomfortable. So, but this is the thing I'm talking about. Like, it's like we didn't fully think this through, because the chair is both mechanical and manual. The chair but has a hanging bag and it's also in the way, but also he has a grabber which he reaches in there, and they don't mention how the grabber fits, because in order to do that you need a collapsible grabber, but it never says that. And all I'm asking for, right, because like I said, I like the fact that there is a wheelchair user in this book. I'm just asking for just a little bit more, just a few extra cents of effort put in to show that things are in fact different for them, that you've actually thought these things out. Like, I double checked, and when he was making the cookies with his aunt, that technically wouldn't be possible if he was at the bench, but the book does mention he's at the table, but it never even dwells on the fact that he has to help bake at the kitchen table rather than at the kitchen bench because it's too high for him to reach. But anyway, what matters is, like I said, the parents and the aunt leave to go pick up some food and stuff, and he gets attacked by the Grelkins. And the reason why is that he goes to the front door and he sees a little bit of red by the cat flap. And it's the reason why the cat can't get outside. Gustav is pushing against it and it's snagged on this little red thing. So he uses his grabber, which is a thing that wheelchair users often use to, reach the ground. And he uses it to pick up the little red thing. And he looks at it closely, drops it in his hand, and he sees that it is a teeny tiny little red cap. And immediately when he's got this in his hand, he hears something yelling out to him saying, "Ah, thief, scoundrel," a little voice. And he turns to see it's one of the Grelkins sitting at the table, angry with him that he's got his hat. And before he can even say, "Oh, I didn't steal your hat, I just found it," it starts throwing cookies at him and pegging them around the room. And so our kid has to defend himself. Like I said, he uses his manual wheelchair to roll out of the way, and he grabs a tray to defend himself. And this thing is screeching at him, and so he thinks the only way to get away from it is to hide in his room. So he sneaks into his room and closes the door. And even though the Grelkin's banging on the door, and clearly, it's barely shin height, so this thing can't reach the doorknob, but he still locks it with his grabber just in case. And because he's nervously sitting there, not sure what to do while this thing's yelling at him, he does the thing a lot of us do nervously, and he starts fiddling with the thing in his hands. And the thing in his hands is a teeny tiny little hat, so of course he tears it. And it's an accident, but he feels bad about it, so he says, "Here, look, take your hat back and stop harassing me." So he uses his grabber to push it under the door, and as soon as he does, the thing yells, "Ruined, spoiled, you little deceiver, you ruined my hat." And the only way that Tucker can get it to shut up and leave him alone is by saying, "Look, leave me alone or I'll call Gustafer." And so that makes the thing fall silent and run away. And after a few minutes, just to be safe, he finally unlocks the door, and the Grelkin is nowhere to be seen. So he rolls into the front room just in time for his parents and aunt to get home. And I like it, there's a brief little moment how they all say, "How did this happen?" And he says, "Would you believe me if I said it was a whirlwind?" And they say no. He says, "Okay, what about squirrels, ghosts?" And in the next chapter we learn that he eventually just made up a lie saying that Gustafer must have done it, which he feels bad for because the cat did nothing wrong. If anything, the cat helped defend him, but he knew that nobody was going to believe him, that little goblin men are chasing him around. Now after this, our kid goes back to school, and there's a positive moment at first because he learns that he did get the part in the play that he wanted. He got to be the Cowardly Lion. But another thing, which has never been mentioned until now, is that also he was working on a science project, okay, and because he's the most creative person in the world, he decided to do one of those vinegar and baking soda volcanoes. So he sets it up in the classroom, but he's made sure to leave all the things he's going to mix together capped and set aside so that they're not touching even. But when they get back from lunch, he sees that there is red foam, from the food dye, and vinegar, and because of dishwashing liquid, there's also bubbles of this stuff everywhere, and it's spilled and spurted everywhere, all over everyone else's posters, which, because they're now covered in vinegar and bubbles, most of them have been wrecked. And of course, Tucker says that he didn't do it, he made sure that they were sealed, and the teacher says, no, it's okay if you did, it's obviously an accident, and we know you wouldn't do this on purpose, but Tucker is furious and saying, no, I didn't do it, and look, I get it, I can empathize with the kid feeling like, he didn't lie and they're calling him a liar, but I have to say this scene just feels out of place for the rest of the story, because after this, our kid goes home, and we get into the final scene of the book, because his dad is home and he says, oh, hey, I got a call from Dr. Okafor. They said that they're having huge issues with their plumbing, so they want me to come around. Do you want to come around with me? And so, of course, the kid says he wants to go with, and he makes sure he takes his mask with him, and they head to Stormwatch House. So when he gets there, his dad and Dr. Okafor immediately go to find the actual leaking pipes to fix them. But our kid, Tucker, heads to Sasha to talk to her, because he says, look, I gotta tell you that I've been attacked by Grelkins lately. That's why everything's been going wrong. And at first Sasha doesn't believe him. She says, look, nobody blames you for what happens. They think it was just an accident. And that does make it feel better, but he says, no, but you need to understand, they came from your house, so you're the one who's in danger from these things. Not only did they cause all the accidents that happened around me, but I think they caused the leaking in your house today. And so to prove it, he says, look, we'll go down to the workshop. That's got to be where they hang out most of the time. We'll go down there, you'll use this mask, and you'll see them for yourself. So they go downstairs, and they look around, and Tucker looks around with the mask, but he can't see them anywhere. And he says, oh, they mustn't be here at the moment. And Sasha says, or maybe they're just not real. And Tucker, of course, insists, like, no, they're definitely real. I've been seeing them this whole time. And whilst they're down there talking, suddenly Eek comes running, and he says, guys, you gotta hurry. There are leaks everywhere. I swear, some of the rooms are flooding. I saw toys floating down the hall. So they decide to head upstairs. Sasha goes running up, and of course, our kid goes into the elevator. But this time, it's not a smooth ride, because as he's heading up, the elevator rattles and rumbles, and then stops dead in the middle of the shaft. He tries to get the handle to work, but nothing happens, but he hears voices in the darkness saying, thief, scoundrel, brigand, and screams out for help, but it doesn't do anything. The Grelkins just laugh at him, and so he reaches around the elevator for something, and he manages to grab something near the lever. It's one of those little Grelkins. He can feel their wooden skin under his hand, so he throws them aside, and he realizes they were holding the handle stuck, so he grabs the handle and pushes it, and the elevator goes the last of the way up to the next floor, and the doors open. And Tucker puts the mask on just in time to see the three little Grelkins that attacked him running away down the hall. And Tucker doesn't waste this opportunity. He thrusts the mask at Sasha, and she looks through it, and she gasps and says, they're real, because now she could see them too. Now, unfortunately, there's no elevator that goes all the way to the top of the tower, so Sasha and Neek tell Tucker to wait there, and they run up to see what their dad's doing about these leaks that are popping up. A moment later, they come running back down, and they explain that the Grelkins must have jammed the lock somehow, because their dads are stuck in the tower room and they can't get out. And Tucker says, well, we've got to break it down. And they say, no, your dad said what's more worrying is the leaking throughout the house. Our dad said that the main valve is in the basement, and your dad said you'd know what it looks like. So he has to head back into the elevator to head back down. And there's a little moment here, I'm I'm not going to dwell on this, but I will bring it up because it annoys me a lot. So the elevator comes, and then all three of them get in the elevator and they head down. But no. Twice now we've said that this elevator is so small that it only just fits his wheelchair, and now 3 children can stand in it. And yes, it does say they squeeze in, but 3 children can now fit in this elevator that only fit 1 a moment ago? Come on, man. Anyway, they all get into the basement, and Tucker finds the valve and he points it out, and then both the Okafor siblings have to work together to turn this valve because it's pretty old and rusty, but they manage to switch it, and they hear the whooshing sound of water inside the valve come to a stop as they've stopped the water from flowing. But before they can get too excited, all of the lights switch off, and they're left in pure darkness because the Grelkins have cut the power. The kids don't know what to do, they're all trapped in the dark, but luckily Greek says, "Oh, I've got Captain Lightforce," and he pulls out a little action figure, and he presses a button, and it says something like, "We will defeat the darkness," and his chest lights up. Now, it's not very bright at all, but it was pitch black in the basement, so thankfully it's just enough to light their way a little bit. So they cross their way to the stairs, but both the kids turn to Tucker and they say, "But with the power out, you can't come up the elevator." And Tucker is, of course, terrified at being down there on his own, but he decides to be brave and he insists, No, I'll be fine. You need to help our dads get out of that room. You need to break that door down. I'll wait here until the power comes back on." So they leave him Captain Lightforce because they say that they can find a flashlight in the kitchen, and they both head upstairs, leaving him in the basement on his own. So Tucker is left down there. He's looking around, and it's not long before, as he's flashing Captain Lightforce around, he hears some scurrying in the darkness. He turns the little toy to see that, it's just a rat, and it runs off, but that's when he hears a little voice saying, "Hello, thief." So he turns the little toy around to see that it is a Grelkin standing on one of the benches, stepping out of the shadows. But the little light on the toy's chest starts to dim and flicker, so a kid presses the button again, and he says that little, "Together we can fight the darkness." And Tucker thinks to himself, I hope you're right. And as the Grelkin starts coming closer, he's not sure what to do, but then he gets an idea. Then he remembered the grabbing stick. Holding Captain Lightforce in one hand, he felt around for the grabber with the other. His hand closed on it, and he pulled it out. Holding it up like a sword, he cried out, "Don't come any closer!" The Grelkin ignored him, continuing to advance. Tucker poked at it with the grabbing stick, but it dodged him. He worked the handle, opening and closing the prongs at the end of it. The Grelkin ducked and kept coming, but then Tucker managed to close the grabber around it. He held it tight. The Grelkin fought him, hitting the stick with his hands and letting out a string of very impolite words.
"Unhand me, thief,"
it said. "No," Tucker said. "I'm holding you here until Sasha and Eat get back with our dads." The Grelkin pounded its wooden hands against the grabber and kicked with its feet, but Tucker didn't let go. He scanned the room looking for signs of the other Grelkins, but they seemed to be alone. He guessed the other ones were making mischief somewhere else in their house.
"You're a thief and a scoundrel,"
the Grelkin shouted. "I think those are kind of the same thing," Tucker said. The Grelkin muttered something incomprehensible. It thrashed around again, then it was still. It stared at Tucker. He stared back. The silence made him nervous, so he said the first thing that came to mind. "Did you really set the house on fire because you were mad at Ahab Thatcher?"
"No."
The Grelkin grunted.
"Well, yes, but not on purpose. Thumb Fumble left a candle burning, and it set some papers on fire."
"Thumb Fumble?" said Tucker.
"My brother,"
the Grelkin said.
"One of them, anyway. There are a lot. Greasepot, Sootwell, Big Leaf and Small Leaf. Dave."
"Dave," Tucker said, laughing despite the fact that he was still pretty scared. "And what's your name?" The Grelkin hesitated.
"Redcap,"
he said.
"Because of my red cap."
"But you all have red caps," said Tucker.
"Mine was the best,"
Redcap said, crossing his arms over his chest.
"and you stole it."
"I did not steal it," Tucker argued. "You lost it and I found it, and it got torn by accident." The Grelkin said nothing. "You know I'm right," Tucker said. "So why did you do all those nasty things? Everyone thinks I did them." Redcap shrugged.
"We were bored,"
he said.
"It's been a long time since anyone has seen us. Ever since Felix died. There's been nothing to help with in the workshop. We might have gotten a little peevish."
"Peevish?" Tucker said.
"It's a synonym for irritable,"
said Redcap. Tucker made a note of it. He liked learning new words. "Are you guys making the pipes leak?" he asked.
"Possibly,"
the Grelkin admitted.
"That was mostly Dave's idea."
"Can you make it stop?" Redcap scowled.
"Why should we?"
For one, because this house is really great and you don't want to ruin it. For another, because I didn't steal your cap and you're just doing this because you're angry. Redcap didn't say anything. And 3, because I'll get you a new cap, Tucker said. An even better one.
Better?
Redcap said.
Better how?
You'll just have to wait and see, Tucker said. Now, can you fix this? Redcap looked at him for a long moment.
You'll have to help,
he said. How? Tucker asked.
Put me on your lap,
the Grelkin instructed. Now it was Tucker who hesitated. What if Redcap was trying to trick him? He could just wait for Sasha and the others to get there, but he had asked the Grelkin to trust him. Maybe he should do the same. He lifted the grabber and brought Redcap closer, opening the claw so that the Grelkin dropped gently onto his lap.
Wheel us that way,
Redcap said, pointing. Tucker did, using Captain Lightforce to show the way. When they came to a big metal box on the wall, Redcap pointed to it and said,
Lift me up.
Again, Tucker used the grabber to hoist Redcap into the air. The Grelkin opened the door on the box, rummaged around inside, and the lights overhead came back on. Tucker lowered the Grelkin back into his lap. But Redcap jumped down and started walking away.
Come on,
he said. Tucker followed him back to the elevator. With the electricity restored, it worked again, and the two of them rode up to the main floor in the silence. Before the doors opened, Redcap said,
I'll go talk to my brothers. There will be no more trouble from us, as long as you keep your promise.
One new cap, Tucker said. I'll bring it to you tomorrow after school. Redcap ran off, leaving Tucker alone in the hall. So, the monster was the friends we made along the way. So, the book's not over, but it may as well be, because our kids discuss what happened. He says, yeah, I made a deal with them. And they say, how are you going to make a new cap? So he goes home and he asks his great aunt Hilda to knit him a tiny little red cap, which she does. He gives it to Redcap. He's really happy about it. And they say, all right, no more mischief. And the Grelkin's like, oh, a little bit of mischief surely won't hurt. And they all agree, yeah, that's fine. And then it ends on a silly joke when he goes looking for his mask and he realizes that the Grelkin's actually pinched it from him. And, then the kids start saying, thief, scoundrel, burglar, just like the Grelkins were saying. Because that's very, very funny, apparently. The end. So Frightville ends on kind of a whimper, if you ask me. I mean, this wasn't really scary, although I will say that unlike the Wish Eater book, I think this book does have some scary moments. I didn't find them scary, but I can understand how they are creepy moments, especially the moments in the elevator, especially having these things creep up on you at night, and the fact that they're invisible, you can't see them attacking, that's kind of creepy. Oh, and also him being locked in the basement, that's kind of a scary moment, and I think it's explained very well. I just personally didn't find them very scary at all. And it's kind of annoying because I actually really, really like these characters. I mean, our main character is a kid who's in a wheelchair, but he's not just the disabled kid. He's also a bit of a scaredy cat. Everybody knows that. And he also really likes acting. We can tell by the fact that he really wants to be the cowardly lion, which is kind of ironic because he's a bit cowardly himself and he wants to be the cowardly. That's interesting there. And then he's got his friend, who's Sasha, who lives in this interesting house with some history. And it makes sense that her mum would be the doctor. And also we get the fact that our main kid's mum is a horror author and his dad's a plumber. All of this stuff is interesting and it works well. It's just kind of the plot that lets it down. Like I said, once I saw that there are these little Grelkins and, you need magic glasses to see them, and a kid got a magic mask which we made suggestions might be able to make you see invisible things, it's kind of obvious where the story's going, right? And the story, besides those really great moments where the story takes advantage of the fact that he's in a wheelchair to isolate him and then later in the story leave him alone after the power goes out, that is really clever. I really like that for the story, but everything around it just wasn't that creepy, and I didn't really think it worked with the plot, man. The Grelkins were just a nuisance. But we mention halfway through the book, and it's only used once, that the Grelkins are scared of cats. So why couldn't that kid have used that to try to stop them? I mean, he did know for a fact that there was a cat mask in Frightville, so he could have gone there and got the cat mask and used that maybe, or maybe he could have just brought Gustafer with him. I don't understand why this book went the way how... think about it. The way this story is resolved is basically our kid picks up the Grelkin and says, hey, stop it. And the Grelkin stops. That's simplifying, but that's effectively what happened. He just became friends with the guy who was being annoying. And, yeah, that's a good lesson for kids and all. But, you can do that in a way that's a lot scarier. Like my favorite way to do this is have the monster be a monster the whole time. Like, obviously we know it's a misunderstanding when the thing says, you destroyed my hat. But what if they didn't talk until the end? Right? That makes them a lot more scary, because if something doesn't talk, you don't know how they think, and so it's a lot scarier, these little things running around attacking things. And so what if when they're in his house they attack Gus because they're scared the cat's going to eat them? Like, that's like, they're attacking things. Then you think, maybe the next thing they'll do is attack a person. So that implies the rising tension there. And then later on, you have it that our kid accidentally, maybe he finds the little hat, and so he doesn't see the Grelkins, but he sees the hat, and so he thinks, okay, so that's proof that they're real, and he doesn't realize that he's stealing it by putting it in his pocket and trying to use that as evidence when he shows it to Sasha later. And that way, when he's trapped alone with the Grelkin and it's approaching him and it's snarling or doing some of the things to try to be scary, because a lot of little things, like little chihuahuas, like they bark like that really annoyingly aggressively because they're so small. Their bark has to be bigger than their bite. So it makes sense that these things will be snarling and hissing and doing all nasty things. And then our kid uses his grabber and picks it up, and the thing gets caught in his grabber. And then finally, when they're stuck together, it says, "Please let me go." And that's the first time we learn that these things can speak. And a kid will be like, "Wait, you could speak this whole time?" It's like, "Yeah, of course we can speak." He says, "Why didn't you talk to me?" It said, "Well, because you were attacking us. Like, why would I talk to you? You're the enemy." And that's when they can finally talk, and he can explain, "No, I'm not your enemy. I was just trying, to protect my friends because you were causing mischief." And then they'd explain, their point of view. Like, that would work to me. Like, having them actually assume that they're a monster, and then at the last second revealing, no, we're not monsters. And although a lot of that would work a lot better, admittedly, if we got a full-on description showing that these things are nasty. Like, why would you, instead of going gnome, I would have gone goblin. I think I made a slip of the tongue when I said goblin partway through the book. But what if they were like goblins? What if they were little green things with pointed ears, and the little, they could still have those little red hats and stuff, and you could have it like I don't know what they'd wear. I don't want them to be naked because that's creepy and weird, but you can have them dressed in weird little outfits, little black outfits, so that they can run around in the dark. But you really do need to describe them as monstrous in order for that twist to work, so that people actually believe that they're evil until the twist happens. But this book really, it lays too many cards on the table. As soon as we see the picture of the Grelkin on the wall and our girls saying, they're invisible, and you see them and they're mischievous too. I already pieced together how the story was going to go, and unfortunately it didn't really surprise me, except with the bits with the kid in the wheelchair. This book didn't try to defy those expectations. It really was just going through the motions. And so, honestly, I gotta give this a C-. It's pretty disappointing overall. It is scarier than I thought it would be, and it does get some plus points for having the disabled character in there, but that really just stops it from being a D+, honestly, because, I struggled to enjoy this one. So, what can we learn from this book? Well, the first thing is obvious, that diversity in fiction can make your stories better. Honestly, my favorite part of this book was the fact that it used the fact that the main character was in a wheelchair to add fear, and not by demeaning that character, not by making them lesser, by showing that they were scared but they had to push through when isolated because of their disability and the fact that the world was not built to make them move around the same way as everyone else. But you can likely do this with so many other disabilities. Like, think about, blindness or deafness. Think about someone who has anything on the autism spectrum, although for the record that can be quite difficult to do, so I recommend doing research on, trust me, I've done research myself. There are dozens and dozens of autistic persons who will gladly offer advice on how to write autistic characters and how not to write autistic characters, as a lot of people have done a very poor job in the past. But seriously, anything from amputees to people with color blindness, like, these can make your stories interesting because you get to not only show the diversity of human experience, but also people with these abilities. Like, they call it disability for a reason, and unfortunately it tends to be because we are dismissing the person's ability, but no, it's because there are all these artificial boundaries which stop them from being able to engage with the world the same way as everyone else, and you can use that in a horror story to isolate your main character, or to have them have a different perspective from every other character. These can be used to make your stories more interesting, more scary, and more engaging. Now, the second thing we can learn from this book is a little more convoluted. I'm struggling to get it into words exactly, but it has to do with the pacing and how you should never pace your story and reveal information to the reader that makes it too easy for the reader to understand the story. And I think the best way to explain this is by talking a little bit about murder mystery. So in a murder mystery, obviously you can't just reveal the murderer on the first page. Or if you do, you need to do so with a lot of tricks to make sure it's not too obvious, because the whole point of the story is that you are solving the murder as you go through. So you can't give all that information on the first page, but as the writer, you have the ability to do that because you wrote the mystery, you know what happens. And so there's an interesting philosophy when it comes to murder mystery, in that the reader is philosophically identical with the protagonist, the detective, because they are there to solve the mystery. But that means that the writer must therefore be empathetic and philosophically aligned with the villain, because the writer wants to keep this a mystery, must hide it. Now obviously they reveal it as the story goes on, but in a way the writer is on the villain's side. We have to be, because if we're not on the villain's side, well, we could simply write on the first page, that guy did it, and then close the book. But that's not how it works, obviously. So in a way, we're doing what we can to help the villain and reveal the way that the villain worked throughout the story as it unfolds. Now, of course, in a way, we're also a double agent. We're trying to help the main character understand the story. We're trying to help the reader understand the story. But to me, that scene when we get, oh, here's a Grelkin, here's what they do, they need the magic thing, to me, that was helping the reader and the main characters way too much. That was playing both sides too early in the story. And if it helps, think of it this way. Most of the time, your villain, your antagonist, your monster, is going to lose. It's inevitable. It's in their DNA. Obviously in horror we can get away with that a little bit more than in other stories, but the villain is likely to lose. So it is your job to try to put off their inevitable loss as long as possible, to have the story go on for the entire length of the book to make it more engaging. And you don't do this by lying to the main characters and the reader. Of course not. You try to be as honest as possible, or if you do lie, you make sure that it's a lie that can be unfolded based on the things that are in the story, but your job is to help the villain, not to make it too easy for the reader to see where this is all going. Like, you know what I think would have helped the story a lot? Is if we made Aunt Hilda more of a character. So get rid of that scene very early on where Sasha explains the story, because later on in the story she says it's just a story, it's not true. So I don't know why she's telling everyone. Instead, have that portrait, the guy holding the thing, and when our kid says, what is that? She says, I don't know, probably a toy. And that explains the later scene with Eek, how he's playing with one of those toys. And then when he starts seeing it around the place, he doesn't know who to ask what's going on, and he might mention it to his great aunt Hilda, who says, oh, they sound a bit like Tomtar. Sorry, I don't know what a Swedish accent sounds like. But what's important is that then that develops the story slower, so we get piece by piece. Now, obviously, you don't need to do everything that slowly, especially if the story isn't about the intellectual journey. It's not about the intellectual conflict. But honestly, from what I can tell in this story, it's almost entirely about that sort of social conflict, and it's resolved by just having a conversation. So obviously, the puzzle and the social issues happening there are the main story, so you could have dragged that out a bit more. Because revealing it so soon really meant that there was very little tension in the story, except for those little moments which I've already praised several times, where the kid was stuck in the elevator. Otherwise, this story just can't be scary, because it didn't have the opportunity to, because the writer wasn't on the villain's side, making them scary. Like I said, that's a little convoluted. I hope that made sense, because it makes sense in my head that you're there to help the villain to lose eventually, not immediately. So that was Night of the Mask, and in fact that was Frightville, the entirety of that series. So I've done a little bit of maths behind the scenes, and that means that if we combine all the scores together, this series as a whole gets about a B-. And I think that's pretty fair. I mean, that fits really well, because it's got a lot of highs, a couple of lows, and some middling books, so that it really does even out to sort of a pretty good, but not great overall series. Oh, and since this is the fourth book in the series, the last book, I also think now's a good time to let you know that I heard back from Mike Ford. I sent out an email asking a few questions, and I heard back from him. The first bits are very basic information. So the reason why he tends to write standalones, but this one was a series, is because he had this idea of a store that sold cursed toys. And so he had the idea first, and that kind of idea works better for a series than a standalone, because you get different characters, different scenarios, different settings. So that's the reason why he decided to do this as a series. As to why it's only 4 books, he said that was a contracting thing. Apparently he wrote this as part of a Scholastic book fair project, and apparently Scholastic usually gets 4 books because it's enough to get a feel for the series, but small enough that if they're not keen, they can sort of end it there. And apparently they just didn't feel like continuing this one. Unfortunately, I think there's a lot of good here, but you know what? That's Scholastic's problem. Because I did enjoy this for the most part. Oh, but the most important part, and the part left to the end, it did seem like a stupid question, but thankfully I got a really clever answer. I asked Mike why he didn't focus on queer themes, and he said that he tries not to focus on queer themes for this particular age group, because this one is aiming a little younger, especially with the middle grade, but he still does slip it in there. So those characters I mentioned in the last book, he says that he likes to focus on other diversities which are easier for kids to identify with, and that's why we get the kid in the wheelchair. And we also had, in the last book, we had Sophia Flores, who was Latin American. But most importantly, as he said, he still has the queer themes in there, but he preferred to put them in background characters so that if you know, and you can still have that empathy with those characters. Because to be fair, and this is me editorializing, this is not what he said, but middle grade isn't really the sort of age when parents want to encourage their kids to start dating, and so whether you're dating a boy or a girl, it's not really something you want to encourage kids to do. So he preferred to use the secondary characters who are a bit older to do that kind of a thing, which I guess is fair enough. So thank you, Mike Ford, for getting back to me. Even though I'm just a small podcaster at this point in time, I'm glad to actually have heard from the author themselves. And I look forward to reading a few more books by Mike Ford when we get to Erie, Indiana, but I don't know exactly when that's going to be down the line. Because we have yet to finish even this first season. We have 3 more books on the block for this season 1. And so I've got a little trilogy of books, a little anthology trilogy. And not only because it was 3 books that seemed to fit quite well, but also I was going to read Scareville, which turned out to be about a scary store. And then I read Frightville, which was also about a scary store, but written much better. And so I had to turn to another series of books called Creep Town. Now, if it turns out that Creep Town is also about a creepy old store, I'm going to be real disappointed, because I just want a creepy town, alright? Like, I love these books. I loved Odds and Ends. Fantastic character. He definitely should show up again, but I really, really just wanted a creepy old town. I've got a couple of books that seem to be doing that, but I'll talk about them when I get to them. But as to Creep Town, I haven't picked up these books before. I don't know what it's like on the inside cover. So we're going to have to explore that together with the last 3 books in Chapter Spooks Season 1. So, hey, if you thought this was scary, just wait to see what I've got in store for you next time.